Hi, welcome to my channel where we provide an alternative view to the common narrative. Today I'm going to talk about or read you a speech of a certain person that might get me into trouble, big trouble. So I would not tell you who it was that said it or when it was said. But with the recent speech of Putin on the 21st of February, and if you have listened to a lot of other speeches I has given, and if you remember what was said, then you might find some similar ideas being expressed by Putin himself and by this person. So if you are interested, please continue watching. Welcome back to the channel where we provide an alternative view to the common narrative. As I've stated in my introduction, I'm going to read you a speech. And what you should do is don't listen to the speech as if it was presented by the obvious person that has done it, and try to, from that point of view, just not listen to it. But try to see the connection between this speech and the current situation we have in the world in terms of the West or NATO and America against Russia, and the speeches that Putin has given recently and even the last, say, year or so, or even more. And you will find that there's a lot of correspondence. And naturally, some of the names you have to replace with a corresponding current name. This was spoken a long time ago. And you just have to replace the names by the current version as if you are Putin. Or if you are Russian, listen to the same speech. So you're going to have a little bit of patience, I'm sorry to say. In any case, here goes. My German countrymen, men and women, changes of government have occurred frequently in history and in the history of our people. It is certain, however, that never was a change of government attended with such far-reaching results as that 8 years ago. At that time, the situation of the Reich was desperate. We were called upon to take over the leadership of the nation at the moment when it did not seem to develop towards a great rise. We were given power in a circumstance of the greatest conceivable pressure, the pressure of the knowledge that by itself everything was lost, and that in the eyes of the noblest mind, this represented the last attempt, while in the eyes of evil wishers, it should condemn the National Socialist movement to final failure. Unless the German nation could be saved by a miracle, the situation was bound to end in disaster. For during a period of 15 years, events have moved downwards towards without respite. On the other hand, this situation was only the result of the World War, of the outcome of the World War, of our own internal political, moral and military collapse, and for those reasons it is particularly important on a day like this to think back to the cause of that entire national misfortune. What was the cause of the World War? I do not want to explain it from the personal aspects, about which so many treaties have been written. Ordered by the President Roosevelt, American scholars have investigated the cause of the World War and made sure that there could be no German guilt. In moments of so great importance in contemporary history, individuals can play a significant part only if they enter the scene as really outstanding personalities. This was not then the case, neither on the German nor on the other side were their personalities cast in an unusual mode. The cause, therefore, could not be due to the failure or to the will of individuals. The reasons went deeper. The German form of government certainly could not have been the cause of that war, for Germany was a democracy already. And what a democracy! Strictly copied from the Western countries, it was compromised between monarchy and parliamentary leadership. On account of its form of government then, this state could certainly not be the cause of the war waged by the democracies against the Reich as it was then. Germany, considered as a political factor in the world, was much more of a cause, for after centuries of disruption and ensuing weakness, the German tribes and states had at last combined into a new state which naturally introduced a new element into the so-called balance of power, an element which was regarded as an alien body by others. Even more potent, perhaps, was dislike of the Reich as an economic factor. After Germany had tried for centuries to remedy her economic distress by letting people gradually starve or force them to immigrate, the increasing consolidation of the political power of the Reich gave rise to a development of economic power. Germany began to export commodities rather than men, thereby securing the necessary markets in the world, a process natural and just from our point of view, but others regard it as encroachment into their most sacred domains. Here we come to the state which regarded this encroachment as intolerable, and that is England. 300 years earlier, England had gradually built her empire, not perhaps through the free will or the unanimous demonstration of those affected, but for 300 years this world empire was welded together solely by force. War followed war. One nation after another was robbed of its freedom. One state after another was shattered so that the structure, which called itself the British Empire, might arise. Democracy was nothing but a mask covering subjugation and the oppression of nations and individuals. This state cannot allow its members to vote if today, after they have been worked upon for centuries, they should freely choose to be members of the Commonwealth. On the contrary, Egyptian nationalists, Indian nationalists in their thousands are filling the prisons. Concentration camps were not invented in Germany. It is the English who were the ingenious inventors of this idea. By these means, they contrived to break the backbone of our other nations, to remove their resistance, to wear them down, and make them prepared at last to submit to the British yoke of democracy. In this process, a formidable weapon was that of lying, that is, of propaganda. A proverb says that if the Englishman speaks of God, he means cotton, and so it is today. Considering how pious and religious are the outward gestures of men who deliberately and with a cold heart drive nations after nations into a struggle serving only their material interests, one is compelled to state that rarely has human hypocrisy reached such a pitch as that of the English today. At any rate, at the end of the blood-stained path of the British history, over 3 centuries stands the fact that 46 million Englishmen in the mother country are ruling about a quarter of the globe. This means that there are 46 million men for about 40 million square kilometers. It is important, my countrymen, to shout this to the world again and again, for they are brazen democratic liars who assert that the so-called authoritarian state are out to conquer the world, while in fact the conquerors of the world are our old enemies. The British World Empire has left behind an icy stream of blood and tears in the path of its creation. It rules today undoubtedly a tremendous section of the globe. But this world government is affected not by the power of an idea, but essentially by force, where force does not suffice, by the power of capitalist or economic interests. Bearing in mind the history of the British Empire, we can understand the process itself only as a result of the complete absence of the European continent as an entity in face of the development, particularly by the absence of the German Reich. For 300 years, Germany was practically non-existent. While the British talked of God without losing sight of their economic interests, the German nation, overstrained to the limit, raised religious problems to such importance that bloody wars lasting for centuries ensued. This was one of the conditions which made the formation of the British Empire possible, for in the same measure with which the German nation spent its strength internally, it was eliminated as a power internationally, and in the same measure England could, undisturbed, build her empire through robbery. Not only was Germany practically eliminated from the competition on this globe during those 3 centuries, the same holds for Italy, where there were similar phenomena as in Germany, but of a political and dynastic rather than a religious nature. For other reasons again, another great nation in East Asia was eliminated, which also for nearly 4 centuries had gradually withdrawn from the rest of the world and ceasing to regard its own living space as vital, plunged into voluntary solitude. In this way, a system arose, particularly in Europe, which England called the balance of power, which means in fact disorganization of the European continent in favor of the British Isle. For this reason, it was for centuries the aim of British policy to maintain this disorganization, not under the name of disorganization, of course, but with a better sounding name. Just as they did not speak of cotton, but say God, they did not speak of the disorganization of Europe, but of the balance of power. And this called balance of power, that is the real internal importance of Europe. Enabled England again and again to play one state against another, so keeping the force of Europe involved in internal struggle. Thus England could thrust the way forward undisturbed into other areas, offering comparative little resistance. And yet, to speak today of England's world power or of England as the master of the world is nothing but an illusion. To begin with her internal situation, England, in spite of her world conquest, is perhaps socially the most backward state in Europe. Socially backward, that is, a state orientated entirely in the interest of a comparatively small and thin upper stratum and the Jewish clique for which it is allied. The interests of the broad masses are of no weight in determining the orientation of this state. Here again, propaganda phrases must serve. One speaks about freedom. One speaks about democracy. One speaks about the achievements of a liberal system, meaning nothing but the stabilization of a regime of a sections of society which, thanks to its capital, is able to get hold of the press, to organize and direct it, and to create public opinion. Thus, in a state commanding the riches of the world, having gigantic living space at its disposal, in a state with altogether hardly 1 inhabitant per square kilometer, in a state so blessed by nature, millions are excluded from these benefits and live in greater poverty than the population of any of the overpopulated Central European states. The country, which is a paradise for a few, is nothing but continuous misery for many, that is, for the masses. Misery in nourishment, misery in clothing, misery particularly in housing, misery and security of income, and in the entire social legislation. And if all of a sudden British Labour Secretary, who incidentally as a member of the opposition is paid by the state, appears and says, after this war, after victory, England will have to tackle social problems. We will have to care for the wide masses. I can only reply, we have done this long ago. It is only interesting to us as a confirmation of our thesis that England in reality is socially the most backward country in the world. Thus, considered internally, this gigantic external wealth is really barren as far as the masses are distinct from the few are concerned. But even externally, this world domination is only a figment. New centers have been given to the world. Gigantic states have risen which can be neither attacked nor even threatened by Great Britain. This whole British idea of world domination was based on getting others, to proceed against the continent. But outside this European continent, or far beyond its great states, have come into existence which are completely unassailable by England. British diplomacy may only attempt to maintain its position, thereby clever manipulations, and by trying to bring other forces into play, which means that it must now attempt to raise the so-called balance of power in Europe to a balance of power in the world. In other words, it has to play great powers against each other in order to maintain at least a semblance of a world power. In Europe itself, however, the awakening of the nations have already done away with the theory of the so-called balance of power, that is, disorganization of the continent. The national development of Germany and the creation of the new German Empire pierced into this disorganized European continent, and to the south of us, Italy did the same. This must be added new elements which make the balance of power appear an illusion. It exists no longer. Therein we will really see real reason for the World War. Since 1871, when German tribes began to organize themselves under the leadership of a statesman of genius, formed an empire once more, and the national rebirth of the German nation found expression in a unified state, Great Britain has been persecuting this new operation, in 1871, even in 1870, immediately after the Battle of Sedan. British newspapers began to point out that this new structure was more dangerous to Great Britain than France had been. It has been hoped even then that Prussia might succeed, perhaps by a long war, in throwing back France, but there was no wish that from Prussia rise there should emerge a national German rebirth, or even more, a new German empire. Thus began the period from 1871 to 1914, in which Great Britain continually plotted for a war against Germany, in which she was hostile and aggressive to Germany at every opportunity, until finally the World War broke out, the work of quite a small group of international unscrupulous rogues. And Great Britain received foreign help for this World War, which again she was only able to wage with foreign help. It is interesting to visualize the development of the British policy of world domination during the last 400 years. First there was Spain with Dutch help, then fight against the Dutch with the help of European states, France among them. Then finally was against France with the help of Europe and that part of the world at Great Britain's disposal. The World War which shook Europe from 1914 to 1918 was exclusively the longed-for result of British statesmanship. Though the whole world had at that time been mobilized against Germany, Germany was actually not defeated. We may safely state this today. I should not like to be a critic of the past if I had not improved upon it. But today, as one of the historic men who have improved matters, I might critically examine and judge the past, and all I can say is that the result of the year 1918 is merely the consequence of a rare accumulation of personal inefficiency in the leadership of our nation. A unique accumulation which has never existed before in history, nor, let me tell these gentlemen, will it ever be repeated. In spite of all this, this country and the Sovereign German soldier for 4 years withstood the attack of a hostile world, and the German nation still believed in the honor of the remaining democratic world and its statement. This credulity of the German nation, which was at the time regretted by many, received a terrible reward. If today Englishmen came along and believed that it is only necessary to put on the gramophone the old propaganda records of the year 1917-18 in order to achieve a new result, I can only say they have not forgotten anything. But unfortunately for them, they have not learned by experience. In this respect, they differ from the German nation. The German nation has learned since then, nor has it forgotten anything. We do not wish to be mean. Many times there have been broken pledges in the past. But what happened in the years following 1918 was not one broken pledge. Broken pledges were mass produced. Not a single pledge has been fulfilled. Never before has a great nation been deceived as a German nation was then deceived. It has received so many assurances. This credulous nation had been promised so much, and what did they do to our nation? It was plundered. It was exploited. A foreign statement, American, was employed to make the German people even more credulous. Perhaps this was really the reason why the German people were duped by this maneuver. But in this respect too, they are immune against any similar attempts. The German nation had opportunities year after year to ponder the sincerity of the democratic promises and assurances and the honesty of the democratic statesmen, to make comparison, to test them against their own experiences. It was in this period that the National Socialist movement originated. I'm going to stop here because this is going to get long. I think I've done about a third of that. But you can replace England or Britain very easily with the Americans. You can replace Germany very easily with Russia. And all the promises that were made by the Europeans and America, and the breaking of those promises, and the wish to see Russia as a threat that must be destroyed and conquered. All of these things are basically in a speech. And that is one of the reasons why I actually now read it to you. Because you can make the same speech applicable to the current situation in Russia. And funny, this thing was spoken more than 80 years ago, 70 years ago. So it shows you, things have not changed that much. And the West have always had a destructive mind, a conquering mind, an exploitative mind. And that's the same thing what we're seeing again and again and again. And that's unfortunately why I am negative about, also skeptical about the future in terms of the Third World War. Because historic events are repeating themselves. Not precisely, but in terms of the same principles. So, this is my story for today. If you found it interesting, please join the channel, subscribe to it, tell your friends, press the bell button, subscribe. Until the next time, cheers.